Hi, everyone. Mike Malatesta here, and welcome back to the How Did It Happen podcast. On this podcast, I dig in deep with every guest to explore the roots of their success, to discover not just how it happened, but why it matters. My mission is to find and share stories that inspire, activate, and maximize the greatness in you. On today's episode, I'm talking with an amazing entrepreneur who knows how to discover and maximize what makes you and your company special and stronger. We talk about what it takes to be a change maker, why you can't stay out of the fray. That was an interesting conversation about brands that get into the fray or stay out of the fray. And then we transitioned to Jimmy Fallon, her very intriguing Zoom background, which is really fun. And if you watch this on YouTube, you'll see that. She does describe it as well, and why it's impossible to read the label from inside the jar.
Brand is just such an overused word now.
Yeah.
So we have so many different meanings of it. You know, some people may think I'm just talking about visuals or your logo. You know, other people understand that a brand like Nike didn't get to be Nike because of the swoosh, you know.
Kristen Graham Brown is a hero to everyone who wants a stronger set of vision, purpose, and values to support the growth of your business and to improve your leadership and power. And here she is. Hello, Kristen. Welcome to the How Did It Happen podcast.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Well, I've been looking forward to this because Kristen and I did have a call earlier and we got to know each other. We were referred by a mutual friend, Charles Bird, I believe, who put us together. And I was just really intrigued by what she was up to what she was up to and her. You know, we started talking about things that maybe we could do to help each other down the road. And I thought, I want to really explore and share her story with all of you because I think you're going to be intrigued. And I think you're going to get something very valuable out of this. And I think you're going to get something that when you started listening to this episode, you didn't think you would get out of it. So big shoes for you to fill, Kristen.
Yeah, no pressure.
Yeah. So let me tell you a little bit more about Kristen Graham Brown. She is the CEO of Hoot Design Company, a woman-owned creative branding and marketing firm with a human-centered approach to problem solving. Kristen and her firm are convinced that people take action when they are inspired and that every touch point, no matter how small, is an opportunity to make an impact. And we're going to dig into that and a lot more here. Kristen is on Instagram at, get this, right? K to the G to the B. So she's at K to the G to the B on Instagram. On TikTok, she is Kristen. That is with an E at the end. Kristen, Graham, Graham. Brown, Brown. And her company is Hoot, Hoot Design Company. .com, and that's where you can find them on Facebook and Instagram as well. So Kristen, I start every show with just a really, really basic, simple question, and that is, how did it happen for you?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, Mike. What an honor to be on your podcast. And yeah, I think that this is such a great question because I hope that my story is not, you know, it's not intimidating. It kind of is one of those stories that would tell anyone that they can take this leap into business ownership, into doing their own thing. So I started at an ad agency in Chicago. I always knew I wanted to be in advertising from the time I was like 12. So I don't know what that says about me, but when I had been an art director there for a little while and my husband got an opportunity to move back to Missouri, which is where we're from, we decided to take it, and I thought now would be an interesting time to try and go out on my own. And I think something else that often happens when you're working for someone else is the grass always seems greener. So at the time I thought, okay, I don't want to be an agency. Clients are crazy. I'm going to go do, I call it retail paper. So like a boutique paper company doing custom prints for people, event paper. So we did a ton of weddings. At that time in my life, that's when a lot of people I knew were getting married. So all that work just easily came to me. So it was basically a wedding and stationery papery kind of thing. That's how we got started. And it didn't take very long for me to realize those people are way crazier than clients. Weddings are insane. And it became quickly something I knew I didn't want to build my life around. So that was my first pivot. And that's like a thread through my story as well, is just how often it might require you to pivot to either stay in business or to stay relevant. And I think that's just what innovation looks like. It's just innovating. So I think within a few years, I had completely moved away from weddings and pivoted to be a marketing communications provider by around 15. And I had started in 2010. And then by 18, I just niched down a little bit further into going all in on brand. And we work with, mostly just because I really, really believe in brand. It's something that just fills me with joy, getting to work with people on brand and on their business. I really think small businesses have the, opportunity to change the world and make a huge change in their communities through one, through their actual service and what they do, but two, through employment. I'm super passionate about culture building and employment, and that's how we serve our clients. We serve clients in one of two ways, either by building meaningful brands for them or by creating meaningful employee campaigns and experiences, which I think go a long way into building employer brand. So that's really where we are today, as niching down and iterating from what once was a papery to what is now a branding agency.
And so the move from Chicago back to Missouri, were you thinking about doing this, going out on your own before that? Or was it something that was like, well, I've got this change now, so let's explore a change and another change?
Yeah, I think it was really organic, like more the latter, that there was this opportunity for change. So I was going to have to get a new job because back then it wasn't near, nobody worked remote. And so I was going to be looking for a new job. And I thought, now's the time to take this leap, lower costs of living here. So I thought it would be a good opportunity for me to like take that leap now. Might as well try it when it was kind of like forced on me anyway, much the way I think a lot of people felt during COVID. It's like this change is here. How am I going to adapt through this change in a way? And for me, this ended up being like, such a wonderful opportunity. I don't know if I ever would have gotten here if we had stayed in Chicago. I loved the agency I worked for. I loved the work. I was finally getting like traction, I felt like, in my career, where I was like doing more of what I wanted after about 5 years of being there. So I would have been really intimidated to start my own thing in Chicago and just into such a more competitive market. And so, yeah, I think that it really was meant to be for me. And I don't know if I'd be a business owner otherwise.
That's a good story, because a lot of us, me included, if I hadn't been fired from my job, I don't know that I would have ever just on my own said, you know what, now's the right time, and I'm just going to do this. Oftentimes there's circumstances that come in that open the door to something you would not have otherwise opened the door to.
Absolutely. Well, and I think it's so interesting when you hear about people who knew as a child that they wanted to be a business owner. But, I wasn't like that. And I just hope that doesn't intimidate other people. Like, everyone is capable of this. I truly believe that at whatever scale makes sense for them. And I think it's really interesting how many people don't take that leap out of just pure fear,
And tell us about this wanting to be in advertising since you were 12. So what attracted you to it? What were your favorite ads or your favorite ad people? I did a podcast on David Ogilvy not that long ago, just like 20 things that David Ogilvy believed in. And it was kind of fun to just go through them. And he's probably one of the most successful advertising people in history. So I'm curious, what was influencing you when it came to advertising?
Yeah, what a legend he is. So really it's visual communication always was. I absolutely loved visual communication. And what I love about it is calling people to action through that. So I was into fine art. I mean, I liked drawing and painting and like clay and stuff like that, but I knew that wasn't really my purpose. It was a fun hobby to me, but what was really exciting to me was getting to call people to action through something that I created. Or almost, every project I had in school, I would, ask my teacher, like, is it okay if I do something more experiential? That wasn't even a word I was aware of then, but, can I like paper mache ads all over a mannequin and instead of doing a paper? And most of the time they were like, okay, and that was just the way that I was able to express myself better, and I think have a bigger impact
Hmm.
on the way I was able to communicate. So it was like from the very get-go, I love typography. I mean, I had notebooks and notebooks filled of just like, hand-drawn letters and doodling and stuff like that. That really just was what was so interesting to me. And I heard on this podcast not too long ago, the Naval podcast, he said that often we're not asked what feels like play to you that feels like work to other people. And that is such a fantastic question. Like, I'm going to use that now with my kids or even my employees. Like, what feels like play to you? Because I
Hmm.
totally do not subscribe to that, mantra. Like, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. I mean, that is way too rosy colored glasses, in my opinion, for what business ownership looks like or what any work looks like. But I really think that if you can do something that feels like play to you, that feels like work to other people, you will be successful. Because it's like, I would read about this. I would do this on the weekends for fun. So for me, it wasn't some, doldrum work that I was doing to execute a project like that. So,
Okay. And as you were talking about the paper mache ads thing, I was thinking, having gone to a few high school art fairs, you generally, this is my experience, this may not be your experience, but my experience is you walk through and you're like, some people are really good painters. Some people are really good drawers, some people are really good sculpture, but they look like what you would consider to be what someone would come up with if you said, hey, let's do an art project. When you say the paper mache mannequin thing, that gets me thinking about the exhibits that you see when you walk through and you're like, what is going on in that person's mind? Is that how I would have looked at your work and been like, huh, or no?
oh, yes. Well, and I don't know how disruptive I was, but I think my personality was always like that. Like I always thought the like term kook was really fun. Like, and I think definitely people referred to me as a kook. That's kind of hoot kind of came from that name as well of like, what a hoot. I love the kind of like the feeling elicited from the word hoot. So to me, what was so enjoyable about those types of projects was like, what am I eliciting from the viewer? Which I do think is different from a fine artist. I think a lot of times a fine artist is really expressing themselves. And it's much more about an inner world that they live in, that they're trying to, call out of themselves into reality. Where for me, it was all about the experience of the audience. And that's where I think you transition
Mm,
from fine art into visual communication, because if we don't communicate in a way that calls people to action, we have failed, at our job.
okay. And I got to ask about this piece of art that's behind you. So if you're watching this, you'll know what I'm talking about. But if not, can you describe what is it? One of your pieces? Can you describe
Yeah, I
what it
wish it
is?
was.
Okay.
Yeah, I wish I could be like, yes, and I painted this. That would be a good story because it's a great background on Zoom. And so then everyone asks me about it, but it's just a black and white, super structural line art piece.
Okay.
Yeah, but I do love it. It makes, and okay, so I would say what inspired me to get this is about the moment that it creates on Zoom, because like we spend so much time on video now,
Mm-hmm.
that it's not even like, I've got these everywhere all over my house. To me, this is a perfect backdrop for a Zoom call. And that's about brand, right? That's like how people perceive me as a person has a lot to do with like all the visual cues that you're subconsciously taking in now about who I am with this background
Right.
here. And that like as much as I can control your perception of me, I want to, because that's my personal brand, or also how you might perceive my company.
And what do you want my perception to be with this
Definitely.
background?
Yeah. So I would definitely want you to think that we are creative.
Hmm.
We're
Okay.
100% a creative branding agency. So we don't handle media for most people. So we stay in the creative space. We are strategists, writers, and designers and project managers. And so what we do is to, elicit emotion from an audience and call them to action is the bare bones of what we do. So I really want you to trust me that I am going to push the creative envelope. One, that I know what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
And two, that I am going to be hopefully bringing a creative element that you are lacking or your team is lacking. Because otherwise, why would you be hiring me if we are not adding value that you don't have?
Sure. When you mentioned typography, and when I saw this, as you were talking through that, I was thinking, okay, so these are letters.
Oh.
And I was trying to figure out if you had some unique way using, all these different style of letters to spell something or create something in there. And I'm trying to.
Oh, that would be genius. Yeah. Like subliminal messaging or something.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Brand is worth it.
Yeah.
No, I wish it was that sophisticated. It's not quite that sophisticated. Really, it's just about a feeling. That's what I think brand is. It's what is the feeling that you get when you interact with my brand.
Got it. So what else, if you can remember, what else were you feeling or doing when you were 12 years old and, besides being fixated on being in advertising?
Yeah, well, I think just my hobbies were always really artistic. I loved bringing stuff to life through art, whether that be sculpture or doodling. And I'm not that good of a fine artist at all. I would never say I create artwork that people want to buy. But it was always a way of expression for me that was really meaningful to me. So I think that, and at the time, really didn't think of it as like, this is definitely what I'm going to do in my career. But then I was fascinated by, reading ads. To me, the ads in magazines were just as interesting as the other content, kind of what they were curating, the vision of what this brand was through just one tiny space in a magazine, was really interesting to me. So, yeah.
This is a little off topic, but I think once a month or so, the Saturday edition of the Wall Street Journal comes with the Wall Street Journal magazine. And it's still this really thick, like, I don't know how much it costs to produce it, but it looks beautiful, right? And I start flipping the pages, and the first 50 pages are ads for very high-end brands. That's like first 50 pages before they even get to like what's in the magazine outside of the things. And I was talking to my wife about this. The last one we were going through, they had an article on Jennifer Aniston. She just happens to be one of my favorites. So I wanted to kind of get to that, but you had to get through 50 pages of ads in order to get there. So it made me think, who's paying attention to these ads? Someone must be, because they're putting so much resources. And when I've kind of been conditioned to hear that, print advertising is kind of going the way of the dinosaur. I'm just curious on if you have a perspective on that, what it is, because it's definitely brand, I guess, because these are all like, but anyway, what's going on there?
Well, I do think that's such an interesting question. And I think that a lot of, there's certainly a level of prestige associated with just being in the Wall Street Journal. So there is a certain sense of that when you see a brand at that level, there is a lot of subconscious work going on there, just you associating them with the Wall Street Journal. So I would say that's half that battle for them, is to be communicating in a publication of that magnitude. Okay. Whether you're really taking it in or and a lot of that, when you are at that level, a lot of that is just, it's name recognition again and again. And what is the level of brand awareness that we have as Cartier or, whatever brand that might be in the Wall Street Journal. I think, Condé Nast has all these like super high-end hospitality brands that, advertise with them, because that's like saying we align with this target demographic, which is the, very elite group of people in our country who are reading Condé Nast or even the Wall Street Journal. So I don't think print is dead. It's just one of those, it's like a tactic that has so much to do with your overall strategy.
Okay.
And I do think that brand, I would always make the argument that without a really strong foundation of brand, those tactics will always fall flat, because the brand drives that strategy. So without that, you're really just throwing stuff up against a wall to see what sticks.
Right. So might be a really good transition, because and if this is a dumb question, I apologize in advance, but how does a company or a person get to the point where they understand what their brand is? And I think most people in most companies could tell you what they think is their brand, but I'm not sure how sure they are about whether it is that or not.
Yes. Okay. I love this question because I really think that so many people, when brand is just such an overused word now.
Yeah.
So we have so many different meanings of it. Some people may think I'm just talking about visuals or your logo. Other people understand that a brand like Nike didn't get to be Nike because of the swoosh, So I love this. And this is what I feel like is my purpose on the planet, is to help find this with entrepreneurs. And my team specifically works with owners and founders in the 2 to 10 million space. So we really want to work with owners and founders who are still engaged in the business, not larger orgs that have, especially when we're talking about creating meaningful brands. On the employer brand side, that's mostly large organizations who have enough employees that they even have like people teams and talent teams. So what I would approach, what is my brand and how do I get there? We use a very specific process that's taken years to hone, but I'm super proud of it now. It starts with brand heart. And you've probably heard of, the vision, mission, values part of a brand process. I think that is essential. We use vision, purpose, and values, and we operationalize those values with you as well. And one thing that makes us quite different is that we deploy an organizational psychologist during that component. So that's a workshop model event, can be about 4 hours. And what we're doing is really digging into like the stories and the really deep level values that the owner or the founder has, the vision that they have for the world, what called them to create this business. And I think that a lot of times that work is either glossed over, or it's, you can't just call my team and say, we need purpose, vision, and values, get back to me in a week. That is such a personal process that you need a professional to mine that data out of the entrepreneur and to guide which roads to go down, which story actually has more impact here. And that's why we decided to use someone with the level of expertise as a psychologist, because I think that's the only way to truly get that super strong product. Then I think another key point that a lot of people miss is that your employees are no one that you're working with is going to read some, 60-page document that you came up with in the brand workshop. It's also our job to take all the massive amount of notes and mining of data that came from that experience and turn it into, belief statements, manifestos, small bits of text that make people want to get up and chest bump. And I think that that's a huge component of brand, is what it does for you internally. I think people are just coming around to this, especially through like the pain of COVID and the way that just rocked the working world. And the expectations that people now have of their workplace. We want to align with brands that align with our own values. So they have to walk the talk. And so often you see a company that might say one thing but does another. I really believe that that's because they didn't do that upfront, really hard work. We can't say that we live in integrity or whatever, and then we don't, so these have to be something that the owner can really walk the talk and be willing to make super hard decisions on. Nike's a fabulous example. I love, of course, everyone wants to be Nike, but they have taken a stand so many times. Like this movie Air, so incredible to see them, take a risk with Michael Jordan when he was more of an unknown, or even like the work with Colin Kaepernick. People don't think about that. Like, what a stand to take at that moment in time to say, we know we're going to alienate a bunch of people right now, and we're okay with that because they stand for something. That creates, I think, a lot of alignment, both internally, but also externally with their customers too. It creates trust.
Yeah. So that's the Air movie is interesting to me because, and I'd like to get your point on it. So, there's a couple of things. One is, everybody wants to be Nike, but they didn't when Phil Knight was trying to sell shoes out of the back of his car, something that
100%.
hardly anybody remembers anymore. But this thing about taking a stand. So Michael Jordan is kind of famous for saying, hey, I sell a lot of shoes to Republicans and Democrats, so I am not going to take a stand on that because I could alienate 50% of my audience. And Nike is doing, at least in the example you used, the exact opposite of that. And then you see other brands like in the news now, sort of like Anheuser-Busch and Target are taking, and Disney, are taking, getting hammered for taking a stance that some of their customers don't like. So how do you think about squaring that up when you're working with the people you work with? Because almost everybody wants to sell to the biggest audience that aligns with their product or their service or their whatever. So yeah, I'm interested on your professional take on that.
Yeah, well, and we've heard a lot of pushback about this over the years, just that why take a stand? There's no reason. Why make ourselves vulnerable to this type of fodder because that's not our role, right? We are a commercial entity. This isn't our role. And I just totally disagree. My perspective on what brand is we are change makers. I mean, small businesses have the opportunity, and large businesses, of course, and large brands even have larger opportunities to create change. We drive culture. If you don't think that brands are driving culture, I think that is a huge misconception. And so you can't stay out of the fray. This is my perspective on this, but I really believe that you will be vanilla. You will be lost in people are inundated with 4,000 messages a day. If you don't want to take a stand on anything, I think you are lost in the mess of 4,000 messages a day, And I think that the critical component here is I just think this needs to be intentional. And that's the part I think that you can miss if you're in an entrepreneurial seat, running as fast as you can forward down the field, trying to, throwing stuff behind you for people to catch, trying to survive day over day through crises like, the economy or COVID or whatever. I totally get why it's hard to stop and make these intentional choices. That's why I think if you do that up front, and that is what Nike did, right? Like, I thought that was so cool how his 8 values or whatever, his statements, we're always on offense, is in everybody's face all the time. Because to me, that is so walking the talk. And I'd rather align with a brand that's going to walk the talk any day versus a brand that wants to stay out of the fray. That's just my personal opinion. So I would consult with any brand that we were working with is the moment that you decided to be a brand out in the world, and especially one with employees, because now those people take on an identity by associating with you. You put yourself in the crosshairs of taking a stand. And I would just all day, every day, I would say it's worth it. I'd rather take 100 raving fans over 200 lukewarm fans.
Okay. Well, I thank you for taking that stand and for explaining it so well. That makes sense to me. So you mentioned employees a couple of times. I think I read somewhere on your website that employees are your biggest brand advocates. That's a belief that you and your firm have. And I I've heard people refer to the engagement of employees as like, you hear about B2B, B2C. I've heard people call it B2E, making sure that you're engaging your employees. Why is it that you believe that employees are, the biggest brand advocates that you can have? And I guess, well, I'll wait to the second question because it's a broader one. So why do you believe that?
Well, I think this is so timely. Like this is the time that we're living in now. One, I think employees will expose you for not walking the talk. They will either leave, which attrition is extremely expensive, or they will put you on blast on social media. The internet has given us all a microphone in a way. I mean, look at this Jimmy Fallon thing. I did not see that coming. I think as far as a personal brand, he has this fabulous personal brand. Who doesn't love Jimmy Fallon?
Right.
Well, now he has all these employees saying that he created a really toxic work environment. I have no idea if he did or not. I have no opinion on that. But what I think is interesting is, they are willing to call him out. And I think that happens so often now in a workplace. So I think it has to do with creating, because if brand is not authentic and we're not walking the talk, you should have not said anything. It would be way better to not say anything than to espouse that you're one thing and do the opposite.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think employees you're either going to create a team that's incredibly powerful because you continue to walk the talk, or you're going to fall. Eventually, you're going to be exposed.
And it's, I'm glad you brought that up about Jimmy Fallon, because you think to yourself, well, if I can't trust who Jimmy Fallon is, how can I trust who anybody is? And I'm not taking sides here because it just seems so unbelievable that he would create an environment that would be scary or whatever to anybody.
Yes.
But maybe, people sometimes when you close the front door of someone's house, they become something else. But that is something that a number of celebrities have. I think Reese Witherspoon has had those kinds of accusations. But yes, you're right. It's gotten, not only has it gotten much easier to get that microphone, but you can also do it and sort of anonymously in a way that you could never do it anonymously before, which gives people, I think on the positive side, gives people who are feeling that way an opportunity to express how they're feeling. And on the negative side, it gives people who are just built to be that way.
Yeah.
To, a platform to do it.
I think that's so true.
Lizzo is the one.
Lizzo. Yes.
Lizzo.
I heard that felt crazy to me.
Me too.
Like what she was being accused of, I was like, what? Like, fat shaming people. That's like, I would say her whole brand is.
Yes, it's the opposite of that. Right. Yeah.
I know. And I'm certainly not saying like I believe every single, thing I read about these people, because, I feel like that's a whole nother topic. But I do think that employees, I mean, that's just reputation, right? So like we work with Dropbox, and a lot of their recruitment is word of mouth. It's referral. And I think that they've built some really incredible teams based on their ability to recruit and refer in, because that tech world is extremely, connected. Right. They're always, referring each other, bringing each other into different entities. And I think that, if you can't execute on what you say that you are, that will be exposed either through methods like we have no referrals. We have a terrible time recruiting. Our turnover is super high. Glassdoor made it possible now for people to go and anonymously post about their experiences at workplaces. And I just think that that's something that you have to consider as very much a part of your brand. Culture is your brand, especially if your clients have any, or customers have any touch point with employees. It obviously is a part of their experience. But even if they don't, even if you're e-com and, all we do is potentially interact with customer service, I think you can feel a brand's alignment or not through the way that, basically through how good they are. Mm-hmm. Are they able to move the needle forward because they have a bunch of people rowing in the same direction, singing the same song? I mean, that will make a strong company or a strong company weak, in my opinion, if we don't have alignment internally.
So I agree. And I think I'll start with a percentage question and then dig in. So in the range that you deal with, 2 to 10 million is sort of the place still run by the founder. In your experience, what percentage of companies are really focused and committed to brand in that size range?
Well, that's a great question. And I feel like if they're working with us, they are. So that I probably have a skewed perspective of, if you're engaging with my team, you do believe this is really valuable work because, we're not engaging with someone on that for any less than 40K typically.
Okay.
So this process is anywhere from 40 to 70K is typically what we're charging. And that has a lot to do with how many deliverables are on the other side. Basically, do you need 12 months of deliverables or do we need 3 weeks worth of deliverables? Because we have a team that can take this and run with it as soon as they get their hands on it. And so I would say by those standards, people do believe in brand by the time they're working with us,
which
just
makes
because it
sense.
is an investment.
Yeah, which makes sense because they've realized something. They've become aware of something that they think you can help them with, right? So makes sense.
Right. Often it's positioning and messaging. We can't describe what we do. People, we're not selling the way that we want. We don't have as many leads, or we're not closing leads, et cetera. Or we have no idea who we're for, that kind of thing. Like you're trying to find the essence of who you are, or oftentimes the owner founder is the brand, right? I call it the brand barometer. Everything has to go through them. They're the only person that really understands the voice and the visuals and the essence, the ethos of what this brand is. That is not scalable. And what I find is right around that tipping point, around 2 million or 10 million, right in that sweet spot is when people start to really butt up against that brick wall of we can't scale. I can't bring in, my marketing team is floundering. And I would argue a lot of times that's because they haven't been given the framework that they need to execute. So they're just throwing stuff up against the wall or based on their interaction with you as a person. And that's not sustainable or scalable. And that's really where I think a lot of people hit something where they're like, we have got to level up. We hear that a lot. It's time to level up.
Right. Okay. So it's sort of like if you went around the company and you asked everybody separately, what do we do? What do we stand for? Why are we different? That kind of thing. You would get a lot of different answers to that question, and the owner would have a question, or the founder would have an answer to that probably sounded more articulate than everybody else's, but it sort of stopped there.
Yes. And most importantly, they're surprised. I mean, that happens every single time.
Yeah. That no one else can just repeat what they're always saying.
Yeah. They're like, well, I can't believe nobody knows this, because it's intuitive to you, right? But it's absolutely not intuitive to your team.
Yeah.
And then put on top of that turnover and generational differences in an organization and all of that stuff. And it's just like rife for problems. So.
Yeah. And you said early on, you were talking about how hard it is to be an entrepreneur or a business owner. You got stuff coming at you all the time. And so it seems natural that even if you started with something solid, like this is who we are, this is, why we're important, this is why we exist, whatever, people coming, people going, customers complaining, having to raise money, and all of these things start happening, and you sort of maybe just erode a little bit. And then you start operating on, well, I said it, I've said it 100 times. I mean, how could anybody not know it? But you're really not, it's all on you. You haven't built anything to support it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Is that what you find often? And it's I guess that's natural. Like, you can only focus on so many things at a time, right?
Exactly. And I think a lot of times it's something that doesn't feel like a fire.
Yes.
There's so
Right.
many other real fires. This doesn't feel like a fire until it's honestly usually a lot of frustration, a
Right.
lot of like feeling like year after year we're butting up against this same revenue threshold. Why can't we break through here? I'm the only person who can help ideate on products. I'm working 80 hours a week, that type of thing. I approve all creative. That is just something we hear all the time.
Right.
It's typically when the owner founder is trying to get off of the dance floor and into the balcony so they can stop being in so much production mode that they realize I have nothing to train people. I have nothing to educate people on who we are.
Right.
And then it's a really great moment to intentionally make those choices. Don't just, and another thing I love, this trope I love to say is it's really hard to see the label from inside the jar. Because we have paid people to help us with our positioning because it is really hard from the inside. I mean, I hear this a lot when people say, what's your point of difference? And I'll talk about our process and they'll say, everybody says that. Every branding
Mm.
agency says the same thing. Well, I don't really feel very in touch with that. So it's really good for the outside perspective is one of the best values we can add. And then of course the expertise, but that outside perspective is almost impossible to do this without it.
So let's talk about that inside the jar thing, reading the label. Because I also think what happens is that you got all these things coming at you, these fires that you mentioned, whatever. And because you haven't built this really strong foundational brand archetype or structure, architecture, you and your people begin to just kind of position yourself like everybody else in the marketplace, right? You commoditize yourself, basically. You forget about your value story. I call it the hidden value story.
Mm-hmm.
You forget about what that is, and you start to just compare. Well, like this is how they quoted the job, and we have to quote the job the same way, sort of thing. And it's like a spiral down to ordinary, being ordinary.
Yeah.
But I'm really interested in you saying that you sought out help. You and your company help people do this for themselves, but you also were aware enough to know that you got to stay sharp too on this. Can you?
Oh, yes. And
So
that was a wonderful experience for me, was actually walking through with Charles's team and making a large investment. I'm a similar size company that I'm working with, and I want to be able to, and I'm asking them to spend X. If I'm not spending that much on my branding and marketing and sales, et cetera, then I mean, it's really, really hypocritical. So it was extremely helpful, to have someone, and I would say he really kind of ripped our positioning to shreds, just like, this is not strong. This is confusing. This is confusing. And I think it's really common to kind of wax poetic about what you do, and also to be out of touch with what is jargon and what is not when it comes to the target audience. And there's all these stats now that people read at a third grade level. They skim everything. They read it in F pattern. So they're skimming, dropping down, reading to the bottom. We have such a limited amount of time to capture people that I think we have to be so on point about what we're saying that I think that, without outside perspective, it's like nearly impossible. Or I find that people they do this exercise again and again and again without really coming up with something very impactful, especially when you're working with, I know this from working with a bunch of creatives. It's very hard to really take the wind out of their sails, to say like, oh, wow, you guys missed the mark big time. It's a lot easier to do that for a vendor, a consultant that's working for you, to say like, no, this is a big miss, guys. We're going to need you to go again. I think the owner takes on a lot of responsibility for the team. Like, okay, why is the team struggling? This is my fault.
Mm-hmm.
When a vendor can't perform, I think there's a lot less responsibility there,
So it's not personal. So the vendor or the consultant or the branding agent is saying, hey, this is where we need to go. And it's not you as the owner or founder having to say, hey, you know what, that's really, I know that was your idea, but we're not going there, and then deal with the
fallout.
collateral damage off that. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. I think it goes both ways. It's easier for us to give them tough love, and it's easier for them to give us tough love.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. Makes sense. So let's, as we wrap up here, how does someone get started with you? You mentioned the psychologist that you bring in, and I'm just wondering, like, that seems to really be starting from point zero. And I'm really curious as to how point zero gets to point one and point two, and ultimately to the promised land of like, here's who we really are and what we and then how do you get that message through to everybody in a way that's different from what we discussed before, where it's like, well, the founder knows this and the people in the organization don't. I mean, that has to be like a rock solid structure, it seems to me, in order to be effective. So hopefully that's not too big of a question because
Oh,
there's a
no, I
lot
think
there.
that's such a good question. I mean, we would definitely start with a lot of meetings, about making sure we're a good fit. We start with a lot of calls to kind of make sure that we're a good fit and you're at a good point to do this work. And then it can take about 12 to 16 weeks. So it's not a small investment on the owner's time, but we
Right.
try and make that a very polished experience from beginning to end, where it's extremely planned out. You have a brand manager when you work with us whose sole responsibility is your satisfaction and setting those expectations. But then you bring up a great point. It's so critical to harness the power of the moment when you're doing something like this and to launch it internally in a really big way. That's something we love helping people with at the end of this process, because we have this great quote that someone told us the day we presented all of this and helped throw this, almost like this internal launch party. She said, yesterday we were a different company. And that's how it should feel. I mean, you just made this big investment in this.
Hmm.
You should be able to harness the power of this moment energetically for months to come, if not longer. And, and externally as well. What does it look like to launch a rebrand out into the world? Because you really just don't want to pass up this opportunity to capture attention, I think, and capture hearts, really.
Yeah. And it's so when I hear that, it's like, oh gosh, it just got more complicated. Not only do we have to believe it, but we have to get other people to believe it as well, right?
Totally, totally. But I think that all starts with that like intentional, authentic deep dive in the beginning. I think it's really easy to sell this when it feels so true.
Hmm.
It doesn't feel like sales. It feels like finally you have words to wrap around the last X number of years that you've been doing this. I finally have the like framework and the architecture, like you said, to bring this to my team in a way that I'm proud of. Like we hear that all the time too. I feel so proud. I feel so legitimized. I feel validated being able to share this work. And that is super transformational energetically as an owner.
Right. And it's kind of weird. Like it seems to me like you mentioned, when people come to work with you, they've already sort of crossed the bridge to having an awareness of why this is important. But it seems odd to me why there's so many businesses out there, and even successful businesses, that they just don't put any effort into that. They don't put any effort into creating a purpose for people to work there. They don't put any effort into creating a purpose for people to work with them. They don't create any effort. They don't put any effort into creating a language that they use that's unique to them. And so it's unique to the marketplace. And if you have an opinion on it, or a message to send to these people who think this way, because there's a lot, in my experience, there's a lot of them. There's almost everybody has done some fake effort at branding. So they'll put a tagline on their truck or vehicle or something. But when you dig in there, the people have no idea except that it's a job, and they, hey, we got a project, we do the job, and there's just no connection to a higher calling, purpose, or meaning behind it for them or for their clients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really well said. I mean, what's funny is that I feel like, monthly, if not weekly, I see someone like that. And it does make me question my life's work just because they're a $500 million company with like a one-page website that is terribly written and designed, and they're not communicating anything. So certainly I'm not here to say that you can't be successful without a strong brand. I question the resiliency and the longevity. So what I would challenge those people to say is, how long is this an enduring brand? Is this a brand that can be sold? I mean, that's something that people have to be thinking about when they're in the stages of in the 2 to 10 million space. It's like, can I sell this thing? Is it me? You know, because then it's like you have nothing to sell. You created a job for yourself, which is better than a lot of us can say, but it is not something that's actually this tangible, strategic, value-based, brand that you can sell. And so I would also argue that I think we are at a pivotal moment here with a younger generation that is demanding this. And so you can get on the train or you can get left behind, because I do not think you will have a group of younger workers who are not here just to punch a clock anymore. They have rejected that, and rejected it in a way that they're willing to show, I'm willing to live in a van. I'm willing to not have a 401k. I'll do gig economy. I'll do Uber and I'll do graphic design on my laptop, while I travel the world. So I think that I would argue good luck in the future with that. But also, is that building a resilient company that can stand the test of what I feel like are almost becoming these crises that feel, every year there's some new, it feels crazy to me that this fallout from COVID is still kind of existing.
Right.
And the way politics feel like they're in every part of our life now. And it just seems like, is that going to last? Or is it a little bit more of a flash in the pan, or something that's not going to be able to weather a big storm? That's my challenge to them, is to really think about that.
That's a great challenge to think about.
Kind of what you help people with, right? Like the exiting strategy.
The dream exit. Yes.
Yeah.
So Kristen, before we go, is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't, or that you would like to leave us with, that I didn't give you a chance to?
No, I feel like your questions were so good and thorough. This has been such a fun discussion. I am always happy to consult with anyone or talk to anyone, at no cost. I love helping people who either aren't at this stage yet or want to have a discussion about why they don't think brand is worth it. So hit me up in any of those places that Mike mentioned, and I would love to talk to anybody. It's very interesting for me and very fulfilling to connect with people on this topic.
All right. Well, there's your invitation, everyone. Kristen Graham Brown, thank you so much for being on the show today. Thanks for the work that you're doing and the explanation, really good explanations that you gave us about a whole range of things. I didn't think we were going to be getting into Anheuser-Busch and Nike and all of those things. So that was fun. Thanks for going there with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And listen, everybody who's listening today, thank you so much for joining us. Hope you got some value out of this. I hope you get value out of everything that I'm doing and everyone that I'm exposing you to. And I would just like you to, one, make sure that you maximize the greatness inside of you today. And two, get to work on creating the future you want to make your property something that you can really own and something that you can be super proud to own as well. So until next time, thank you. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to the show. And before you go, I just have 3 requests for you. 1, if you like what I'm doing, please consider subscribing or following the podcast on whatever podcast platform you prefer. If you're really into it, leave me a review, write something nice about me, give me 5 stars or whatever you feel is most appropriate. Number 2, I've got a book. It's called Ownership: How Getting Selfish Got Me Unstuck. It's an Amazon bestseller. And I'd love for you to read it or listen to it on Audible or wherever else, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. You can get it everywhere. If you're looking for inspiration that will help you unlock your greatness and potential, order or download it today so that you can have your very own copy. And if you get it, please let me know what you think. Number 3, my newsletter. I do a newsletter every Thursday, and I talk about things that are interesting to me, and or I give more information about the podcast and the podcast guests that I've had and the experiences that I've had with them. You can sign up for the podcast today at my website, which is my name, MikeMalatesta.com. You do that right now, put in your email address, and you'll get the very next issue. The newsletter is short, thoughtful, and designed to inspire, activate, and maximize the greatness in you.